Hello everybody. If I say the words Honda Type R, any petrol head that's been even remotely interested in performance cars over the last 30 years is almost certainly going to have an image in their mind straight away. You see, unlike that McLaren that just went past, even though they've been pretty affordable cars, they've still punched well above their weight, and for those of us who are lucky enough to sample all types of machinery, there's just something about a sporty Honda that's very, very hard to beat. Although their configurations may be in some ways compromised, often being front-wheel drive powertrains, they're still a heck of a lot of fun. And today I'm driving a somewhat forgotten example of that performance icon. This is a 2001 Honda Accord Type R. At a quick glance, it might look like someone's taken an old Rover and stuck some bits from Halfords on it. And indeed, there is a little bit of reality in that statement, because these cars were produced at the time when Honda and Rover were working very closely together. But make no mistake, this is a Honda engineered and built product. It may have been constructed at the Swindon factory here in the UK, but this is very much a Japanese car at heart. You have only to sit in this car and you're transported back to a wonderful and very different time. The dials in here are pure, simple, old school Honda. 3 great big, very clear white dials mean that you know exactly what's going on. This brilliant, easy to use gear shift is light, is accurate, is precise. It's everything you've ever been told a Honda gear shift is. Now, what is different for me is the engine. You see, up front we don't have a K20 or a B series or even the F as you get in the S2000. This is an H22. Let's find out how it works.
Stepping into the Accord, two things strike me. Firstly, the gorgeous Momo steering wheel is exactly the same as that on a Ferrari 550. But secondly, and more important, the view out is incredible. For a front-engined car, the bonnet seems impossibly low, and all-round visibility is truly excellent, making the car very easy to place.
As with any Honda, it of course thrives on revs. The VTEC crossover is set just shy of 6,000 RPM, and it's quite a violent change too. Redline is set at about 7,500, a little lower than I'm used to with the S2000, but this car also has much more torque. In fact, out of VTEC, it actually feels like it has some performance. On paper, the numbers may not be that impressive. About 212 horsepower in this English Accord Type R versus the 220 in the confusingly named Japanese Euro R, which wasn't sold in Europe. Hey, go figure, it's Japanese, they do what they want. And 164 pound-foot of torque delivered at an almighty 6,700 RPM. The driving experience of the Accord Type R is an interesting one because it's equal parts familiar and unfamiliar. It rides really nicely. This is a very compliant setup, even with eye-back lowering springs on it. In fact, the only other modifications to this car are a teen strut brace at the front and a lightweight Fidenza flywheel. That's it. You can really tell that that flywheel is a bit light because there is absolutely no hesitation whatsoever when you're trying to heel and toe with the car. Now, this stick down here is connected to a 5-speed gearbox with a limited slip differential in it. It's a very similar setup to what you'd get in the contemporary DC2 Integra Type R. Not quite the same, but very close. And that means in corners, it's a mighty thing indeed. Now, ultimately, this is not going to be quite as good a performer as a DC2. It's a little bit heavier. This is 1,350 kilos in the real world, which is still a lot lighter than, let's say, an equivalent M3, which would have been about another 100 kilos more. It's about 100 kilos again up on my S2000. But for a road like this, where you haven't really got any other traffic to worry about, the performance is ample. The biggest problem with the gearbox is because it has only the 5 ratios and not the customary 6 for modern cars, you do find yourself dropping out of VTEC a little easier than you'd like. Even if you take it pretty much all the way to the red line, it's still very easy to drop out of the power band. That makes it slightly more frustrating than it really should be. This thing loves bends. It really does. And that throttle is so sensitive. I mean, that's crazy how sensitive that thing is. It just wants to go. The limited slip differential really hooks up and pulls you around the bends. The Accord is all round a bit of an oddball. Not really a luxurious car in the same way that an M3 is. Okay, luxury is perhaps a strong word for an M3, but you know what I'm saying. This feels like a much cheaper car. However, it's not the scalpel sharp and focused weapon that something like an Integra or even the Civic would be. This probably also wasn't a particularly cheap car when it came out, and for that reason, it never was that common. With a lot of these old Japanese type cars, you often say, well, yeah, once upon a time they were everywhere, but now they aren't. Well, these never were. Simple as that. Honda sold less than 2,000 of them in the UK. This is a facelift example. For the facelift, they sharpened up a few little things. They also lost the body kit that earlier cars had, which made them stand out a little bit more, but they also modernised it and they sharpened up the looks a little bit. And it's not a bad looking car, but it's a real sleeper, especially in this subtle silver. It sounds fantastic too. That 4:2 to 1 manifold, that is standard. As silly as it sounds, it's sort of at 20-30 miles an hour. This thing feels so much more eager than the S2000. It really does. It just wants to go. It is actually pretty comfy too. You expect a Type R to be on the firm side, and many Japanese performance cars, especially the genuine JDM ones, they have a tendency to be far too stiff for our roads, but this one's actually pretty good. Brakes work really well, they're nice and responsive. You can play with this car a lot, you can take some serious liberties with it. The chassis is really nice. The steering's actually pretty good by Honda standards too. It's a weak point in the S2000, and although this isn't brilliant, it's actually a hydraulic setup, which is quite unusual for a Honda. They often like their electric steering racks. Even the NSX had one, and they just aren't the best. It's really taken until the most recent Civic for them to get it absolutely spot on. But this is quite nice. It's got some texture. Weighting's still a little bit weird, but the chassis is talkative. These Recaro seats are really, really sweet. It's not the most instant of responses. When you turn in, there's just an initial moment where it just loads everything up, but once it's loaded up, it's really communicative and it's willing to do whatever you ask of it. You've just got to realise that there's just not quite that sharpness you get from a modern car. And that's probably in part thanks to the fact that it's riding on sensibly sized tyres. This one's recently had its original alloys put back on it. And one of the reasons for that is that it is going up for sale soon. I asked its owner what he's going to ask for it, and he's asking £6,000. Now, I happen to know that that doesn't cover anywhere near the amount of money that he spent on it in his 14 years of ownership. See, unfortunately, as with many domestic market Japanese cars, Honda UK didn't really see the benefit in applying much in the way of rust protection to their vehicles, and so it didn't take very long before these were falling apart. Corrosion apparently really had a fondness for nibbling at the firewall in these, and once that started, when these were worth only a few £1,000s a few years back, well, that was essentially game over for your lovely Honda. You might as well have just chucked it straight in the bin. And for that reason, I expect that the attrition rate on these is probably very, very high. And that's a great shame because it's a really nice, decent, all-round fun car. Sure, a lot of people are going to look at it and just go, it's got a cheap old interior that's a bit like a nasty Rover that their nan used to have, and just dismiss it. But that would be doing this car a massive disservice. This is a huge amount of fun. For driving through a nice little town like this, the exhaust is plenty quiet. This car mercifully has the standard system on it, and I really can't imagine why you'd change it. It sounds great for normal stuff, and it sounds beautiful when you're pressing on. This is a lovely little performance car. Go on! That H22 might be an old unit in comparison to many others that I've driven, where there is absolutely nothing old-fashioned about the way it chases that red line. and I haven't actually yet found the fuel cut-off. It's somewhere north of about 8,000. Is it perfect? No, not at all. But for something sensible that can be silly when it wants to, that's a real decent alternative to an EP3, if you're into your cool old Japanese stuff, honestly, give one of these a go. I know everyone's going to be all over the Civics, and there's a lot to be said about the EP3. I really do like them. But this is a little bit different. For that reason, a little bit more special. And it's pure Honda. It may have been made in Swindon, but that heart is very, very Japanese. There's a reasonable amount of room in the back seat, and the boot is huge. It hasn't got the floor in it at the moment, but there's loads of space in that. You could happily take the family away camping in this thing if you needed to. I wouldn't, but that says more about camping than the car. I know Stephen's going to regret letting it go, but I also know that he's got something else very special and true JDM on the way, and if I'm lucky, maybe that'll appear on the channel too. And if you want to see more about this car and the others that Stephen has, check out his YouTube and his Instagram, 118GT. For now, thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.